Opening day right around the corner, and always good to catch up with Steve, and does a great job covering baseball for USA Today. How you been, pal?
Great, Rich. Looking forward to getting this thing started.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's start off in the NL. How about the Mets with a little bit of a scare with Matt Harvey is going to start. He's going to be out there for the opener, had a blood clot in his bladder, which is kind of a strange situation. But I said this during yesterday's show. The Royals seemed like the team last year that they were not going to be stopped, where the Mets were just kind of content with being in the World Series. I think if you're the Mets this year, your mantra is basically unfinished business, because even from that first at bat in the World Series, that's when the whole momentum shifted. But how about the Mets and their outlook going into the season? How do you see it playing out?
I see them banking on those three main starting pitchers being healthy, and if they're healthy and can give them close to 200 innings, it's going to be tough to beat them. However, though, I think that because they've worked those guys so deep into October, I know that may not be a popular opinion, but I'd have to think that there are going to be some repercussions somehow with one of those three, maybe two of those three, and if that happens, then season could come off the rails pretty quickly if they don't have that starting pitching.
No, I agree. I think, again, I also think to some extent the health of David Wright. We already know every single season it just seems like Granderson gets off to a slow start. He'll eventually kind of catch up and get his numbers. I'm also curious, too, before we go to the Phillies with the Yankees as well, because you kind of know that bridge to the 7th, 8th, and the 9th innings. And I look at that starting rotation. It seems as though within that dugout, in that locker room, they want CC to get that fifth starter spot. I'm wondering, with the money he's being paid, if need be, would Cashman ever consider using him throughout the season out of the pen?
I don't think so, just because it's so foreign to him. He's never had to do that, and he's always been a starter, and pitchers are characters of habit, and it takes an awful lot. We saw in the Jabba Chamberlain thing when, he was jerked from the rotation to the bullpen and all of that, how it just completely, turned him into a worthless pitcher. I think it, not to say that CeCe has a whole bunch of value right now, but he can provide some innings and some stability if he's a starter. So I think he's pretty much got to stay there.
You look at the Phillies, a very young team. Obviously, a couple of vets left with Castoffs and Howard and Carlos Ruiz. You got the young player in Franco, just a rising prospect, rising starter in this league. And a lot of people think that he could potentially be a future MVP candidate. I look at the starting rotation. You go back last year, Billingsley, Williams, Buchanan, Harang, Hamels. And then I compare it to this year where, you look at Nola, you look at Morton or Eichhoff or Velasquez, who they just named the fifth starter, and Hellickson. To me, I think this year's rotation is vastly improved than last year's, because it's kind of embarrassment to kind of roll out Harang and Williams every fifth day. And I think I think this year's starting rotation is going to keep them in games. I don't foresee them winning 80 games, maybe not even 70 games, but I think the starting rotation is going to keep them in games this year.
I think you're right, at least in most games, because Nola is a guy that can throw strikes and be effective, maybe not throw deep into games just yet, but I think he's got, kind of a number two starter upside with maybe a little bit beyond that if he improves his strikeout rate. Morton has done well in the past in certain instances, same with Hellickson. I really like Velasquez, too. I think he's a guy that's got a huge future ahead of him, and just an electric arm. That's something that the Phillies really haven't had in that starting rotation for a little while. And Eichhoff is solid as well. I did see something that the Phillies, for their opening day pitching staff, they have one guy that's the same from last year's opening day, and that's Gianmarco Gomez. Mm-hmm. So you see what kind of a turnover the Phillies have done with their rotation and with their bullpen.
Are the Cubs the clear-cut favorite to win the NL Central, especially when you look at their lineup top to bottom?
I think with what they did in the offseason, added to an already very good playoff team, I think you have to consider them the favorites, but it's certainly not a lock by any means. There are some good teams there in the Central. The Cardinals are always solid, and the Pirates are dangerous. So I think that you have to say that with Joe Madden running the show and everything there, they have all the pressure on them. And it's a nice situation, I think, for St. Louis and Pittsburgh, because they don't have to worry about being the hunted. They can be the hunters.
Yeah, but I've said this to you over the last year or so, and we've talked about this, especially with the one-game playoff. You know, if you're the Pittsburgh Pirates, you got to win the division. I mean, think about this. I would have argued that they were the best team in baseball last year, but the last 2 years, they've gone up against starters that just had great outings on the mound in that one-game playoff. I mean, if you're Pittsburgh, your mindset has to be win the division this year.
It has to be. You're right. And the fact that having had that same thing happen, what is it, a couple, 2-3 years in a row, losing in the wild card game, it's got to be division or bust. And that's kind of it surprised me that they didn't go out and do more this off season to improve the rotation. And maybe Ray Searage, the pitching coach guru there, is going to get something out of the young guys, Tyler Glasnow or Jamison Taillon or Juan Nicasio, who's been lighting it up this spring. Maybe he makes the rotation and makes a difference. So it was surprising that they didn't do more this offseason, but maybe they have some tricks up their sleeves.
Again, a couple minutes with Steve Gardner. Does a great job covering baseball for USA Today. Got a couple minutes to play with on this Wednesday. When you look at the Angels, I said when we were actually getting ready to go to this segment before one of the breaks, I alluded to Mike Trout, and I think he's going to put up, again, he's going to have a monster season. I just look at this Angels team, though. I don't see them winning a lot of games. I look at this team. They're an older team. You got Pujols coming off that foot surgery, getting his feet wet again at first base. I think they're an aging team in some spots. I just look at Trout as a guy that he's going to get you, 35 to 40, driving 100. His batting average is going to be over 300. I think he's going to have a great year. But I don't know. Maybe it's me. I see them taking I just don't see them being those great Angels teams that we've seen over the years. Maybe they had that second half run sometimes that we see, but this year I think is going to be different.
Yeah, I think, again, another team that could have done a lot more to improve themselves in the offseason, but still a little bit hamstrung by the big contract to Pujols and that sort of thing. They're not getting anything really out of Jared Weaver, it seems like, and they're paying him a good deal of money. And their bench is woefully thin. I think that's the real problem. The Angels have to go through this season and basically have no injuries because their bench is, like I said, hardly any kind of talent on that bench. They're just kind of placeholders, and they can't even look to their farm system. I think they probably have the worst farm system or one of the worst farm systems in all of baseball, so they can't pull prospects, like some clubs are able to do in midseason to reinforce areas. So they have to stay healthy. Albert Pujols has to stay healthy, which is not a given. And they got to get bounce back seasons from all of their starters. Really, I don't know that anybody had a very good one last year, and that's what they need to certainly to be competitive.
It's very hard to win in baseball, let alone win multiple championships, back-to-back World Series. To get there is one thing, but to win on both times, because we know that the season is such a long season. It is a grinded-out season. With that being said, as we close it out, do the Royals take a step back this year? Is this kind of the year where they regress? They for the last several years, going up the mountain, climb, and getting pushed back, then climb, and get to the World Series, losing it, and then finally getting back there and then winning it.
Well, when you're on top, there's only one way to go. But I think the Royals have looked at what they needed this season and really trying to bolster that rotation with Ian Kennedy and getting Chris Medlin into the rotation now. It's not a formidable starting five, we'll say that, but the bullpen is still deadly. The defense is still great, and their relentless offensive ability, as we saw, time and time again in the playoffs, to just spoil really good pitches. It doesn't matter. The great thing in Major League Baseball, at least one of the trends, is so many guys throwing 95 miles an hour and pitchers just overpowering hitters. The Royals are basically one team that can't be overpowered. Mm-hmm. And while it may not be really pretty during the regular season, it certainly works in the postseason, as we've seen the last couple of years. So I think they're still going to be in the mix.
And you mentioned, too, to close it out with the bullpen last year, They signed Ryan Madson. He missed 3 full seasons with injuries. Was a key component with those innings pitched in the postseason, winning 2 games, including Game 4 of the World Series. Wade Davis the year prior to that. So, if anything, they've got the bats, they got the bullpen. I just think sometimes, like you alluded to, once you get up there, you kind of get fat in the off season, so to speak, in sports. When you get that championship, it'll be a great story. They can get back there, but it's 162 games, my friend, 162.
Exactly. I saw Kansas City in spring training. They still look just as hungry as they were.
Wow.
And a lot of the projections and everything still don't look at them favorably, and they've got that permanent kind of chip on their shoulder because of it. That's
a great point to close that out. All right, my friend, opening day right around the corner. We'll talk next week. Can't wait for this season and, of course, having you on board.
Sounds great, Rich. Look forward to it.
You got it. Steve Gardner does a great job covering MLB baseball.